It was tighter, but they were, I guess you could say, used to it. They also probably had equipment that was available to accommodate a little bit tighter spacing and some of those circumstances. So while it may not be as comfortable as what we've had in the past, it is possible. It's certainly something that can be done, and it may just need some additional equipment or some varied equipment to do that. But I guess that's really something that's up to the city staffing and the city administration as to whether they would be willing to do that. They also probably had equipment that was available to accommodate a little bit tighter spacing and some of those. Yes, exactly. Right. Okay, any other questions from the commissioners of the staff?
This is Toby. I have a question. Lyle, does this concern with the utility easement apply for all the lots, or is there some of the lots that maybe is not as much of a concern?
Yeah, so it would be just typical across the board. So where and I changed that just a little bit. So because of the two different cross sections, again, around the perimeter, this road that has the green next to it, we've got the 5-foot landscape area plus the public utility easement. So that becomes a little bit different than these interior streets. Technically, there's 5 feet less to work with without that park strip area. So you've got two different scenarios that we're looking at. One is easier than the other based on the current proposal, and that's the perimeter road because it has more room to work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other questions?
I have a question. So you were saying it could possibly end up being to where the houses are 5 feet apart on each side. Is that correct? So each house would be about 10 feet apart?
Yes, that's accurate. So the home is 5 feet from the property line, 10 feet from the next home.
Okay, and you mentioned that the fire department said that they were okay with the street widths, but it seems pretty close. I'm sure I've seen houses that close before, but is that a fire hazard at all, having them that close to each other?
So, I mean, that's part of the reasons for setbacks is to help with fire control and spread. But with 5 per building code, that's fine. And we'll often see buildings that go even closer. They just are required to build to a higher fire rated standard if they did go any closer than that. But 5, I think, is something that we're comfortable with in that end. And my understanding is even with the fire department, and we've done it before.
Okay.
So, Lyle, this is Steve. Let me just interject. What about the proximity with the rural-urban interface and wildfire? Is that a concern with such close density also?
Not that I've heard about. So we could ask that more specifically if it comes back to you, or prepare that for the city council for consideration.
Yeah, I mean, just having recently had that event up there on the hillside, and then having such density, it's just always that rural-urban interface is always an interesting place to have density like that. You want to spread it as much as possible sometimes. It's just a concern. You just want to make sure that's being thought of before we get into this.
That's a good point that Steve raises. What's the rear yard setback that would be required? Or I guess it could be varied under this.
Yeah, so they've not requested any variance or deviation from the typical rear yard setback. So it's a 15, and that's standard for an R18 zone. The lots that are closest to at least to the east, which is the Wilderness Park, are the deepest and largest lots. So likely they will have larger yards and increased spacing and ability to do that. Those to the south might be a little bit tighter.
Yeah, and you've got more brush there. You look at it, there's quite a bit of vegetation on the south side.
So you'd be looking at 15 feet, and that would just be typical of all of our R1 zoning districts.
Okay. It might just be good to, I don't know if that would be part of the requirement or just a recommendation or advice to them that they take a look at the wildfire protection, wildfire spacing of potential fuel in those rear yard areas. Okay, Any
I have
other
a question.
comments? Yes, go ahead, Josh.
And we can address this maybe after the applicant if needed, but Lyle, what is on the most narrow public street improvement that is allowed under Kaysville's code? What is the most narrow asphalt width, meaning lip of curb to lip of curb, not back of curb, but lip to lip? Do you know?
Yeah, so I think that's, our code's not as specific to that, if I'm recalling correctly, but the International Fire Code is. And so that's where that comes from. And 24 feet is pretty much the minimal standard of hard surface to meet fire code and give them the access they need.
But okay, so but you don't know. I guess maybe I'll ask it this way: do we allow 24 feet of asphalt on any other public right of way in Kaysville right now?
So within a public right of way, no. So our smallest public right of way standard it's a 55-foot right of way. It's 35 feet back of curb to back of curb. So that's about 32 feet of asphalt roughly.
Yeah.
So private streets, we have several that are the 24 feet back of curb to back of curb, and that's very common. And that's, again, based on this flexibility from the private street and the PRED. If they're plowing it and maintaining it, we'll let them do that to a different standard. It provides enough width that two cars can go both directions, and gets tight, but generally one car can park on one side of the road and still have enough space for two other cars. So I think it's really tight, but an 8-foot lane, you can divide that 3 ways, room to parallel park and drive past each other. And that's about what all the 24 feet gets you.
Yeah, and again, we can maybe address this in a minute, but I just diagrammed this out to myself so I could figure it out. But the standard width of a parking lot or a parking stall, excuse me, is 9 feet. So you picture 2 parking stalls, that's 18 feet. That leaves 6 feet left. And that seems.
Yeah, I don't think you could have parking on both sides in a situation like that. And typically, there are some communities that do allow asphalt at 24 feet or a street width at 24 feet, and they generally will only allow parking on one side if they allow any parking on the street at all.
Okay, so that's the last part is the key, because to me, even if you allow parking only on one side, then that leaves you, what's my math? That leaves you 15 feet, I think. Yeah, 15 feet basically for that. And that's not a comfortable width for 2 cars to pass. You'd have to be playing like leapfrog.
You're driving 2 smart cars at that point and still cutting it tight. So generally you'll do exactly as you stated, commissioners. One will slow, let the other one pass, and until they get past the parked car situation. So identifying areas where parking is allowed, if at all, has value.
And then last question, I guess, just to clarify what I see in I think the development agreement or the diagram we saw, is what's being proposed a rolled curb, or is it a standard curb and gutter?
Yeah, the developer can maybe clarify, but to me, it looks like a rolled curb versus a high back standard curb and gutter.
And the city doesn't care one way or the other?
Now, on the private street, we allow it. We simply just require that there be curb and gutter of some fashion. And that's generally what we see in the private street developments are rolled curb.
Yeah.
Even here in Kaysville.
Yeah, okay. Those are my questions for now.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's go to the applicant.
Okay, I see him on here. I don't see any hands raised. So if there we go. All right, I'm gonna let him in. Okay, so Dave Morton, I've got you here. You're live. You should be able to speak.
Wonderful. Lyle, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Commissioner. first and foremost, I want to thank everybody for being able to make this meeting. This is not easy for everybody, so thank you very much. This has been just an absolutely fantastic project. We're so excited about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have as we discuss this. As I outlined several months ago when we were before you, this piece of property has some very unique attributes. Along the eastern border, it has an aqueduct. We've got the expansion of 89 on the western side. We also have some power lines on the western side. And then we were, at the time when I first met with you, we were in the process of doing a fault study, and there is a very minor fault that we have done. But one of the things, as we indicated to the council, is that we have taken our weaknesses and made them strengths in how we have actually planned this community. And that is one of the things that makes this so exciting. As you'll see, the open area is essentially, we're taking advantage of those areas where we cannot build to create some beautiful open space for those individuals that will be able to live in this area. In addition, we've also created somewhat of a mixed community to allow larger lots on the eastern end, where we've got some challenges with the aqueduct, where those will be third to some of them even half-acre lots. We then have our next highest, largest lots along the northern border of the property, where we've got our neighbors. And then we have utilized, if you would, somewhat of the contours of the property to create our street structure and to allow a very nice community. In addition, the private roads, one of the advantages that we have there is to create a certain feel to the area. The goal here is to create a nice private feel. And part of the reason for the narrower roads is to discourage parking along the road, to really encourage individuals, parking in their garages and in their driveways. And that is the focus. So it's to deter, if you would, a lot of parking along the streets to keep the community looking nice. We have spent quite a bit of time working with not only the Talbots, but also the neighbors in the area. Prior to the city council meeting, we met with, I believe, every single neighbor to the north to understand their concerns. And we have, matter of fact, we have committed to help some of them. We've got some of those neighbors up there have some challenges with internet access. And as we bring utilities up through here, we will plan to help where we can with some utilities, as well as being a good neighbor and making certain that we have our higher densities, which border those neighbors right there. And then the densities, the lot sizes that get slightly smaller will be closer to 89, which are generally the little less desirable lots, but still will be very, very nice homes. In addition, during the city council meeting, we actually gave some elevations of what some of even the smaller 6,000 square foot lot, 5,000 square foot lot homes would look like. And these homes will still sell for, will still have an excellent market value. And so as we have spent a tremendous amount of time laying this out, understanding the needs of the city, understanding the unique nature and characteristics of the land, and understanding the concerns of the neighbors, to really do our best to develop a really nice project in a nice community. So part of the other thing to understand is that the setbacks are minimums. We clearly, on the larger lots, the smaller setbacks will not be used. Those smaller setbacks essentially allow us to be a little bit more flexible on some of our smaller lots, which is generally what is where it's used. And so as you can see, we've got multiple, probably, I think we've got a total of about 4 different product types, maybe 5 if we include the estate lots along the eastern border. So we have not actually, I'm glad there was a comment made specific to some of the fire concerns. And we will look into that absolutely, to see what concerns there may be. So with that, I would like to again thank staff. Has been great to work with on moving this project forward, as well as the commission, the council have been tremendous to work with. So what questions can I answer for you?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Morton. We appreciate that. I just have a question for you. When you mentioned the open space and you were saying you intended that to be beautiful, what are your plans for the open space? How are you planning on improving that, or what do you plan on doing there?
It's a great question. So the open space on the farthest east will be very park oriented, with trees, probably not include any type of tot park on the upper one. It will be landscaped so that when the homes that are facing that with their front yards out there will have just a beautiful open space area that they can use to, it will be grassed, to put a blanket on, to enjoy. The trail system will be interconnected to all of our open spaces, where we will have most likely some tot parks on some of the more western open spaces, which would be more consistent with some of the smaller lots, for a little bit more beginner type homes. All of the homes will be in the range of between the minimum will most likely be between $400,000 and $500,000 from a market perspective. And then obviously, as we go all the way to the east, there will be most of those lots, I think there's 7 total of those private lots will be done most likely by custom builders, and those homes will be extremely nice. So I hope that answers your question. So we haven't really got into the real details of exactly how the open space how it exactly will be laid out. But as from a conceptual perspective, we see the open space again to the east being lined with trees and grass, and really kind of creating a really nice, beautiful open area. And then the open space farther to the west will have some amenities such as tot parks, some equipment like that, which will be then interconnected with the trail system, so that anybody in that community will be able to utilize that, in addition to be able to access any of the trails to the east, as Lyle indicated. So there are so many wonderful things about this project and its area, and we really want to take advantage of that to make this something that Kaysville City can be very proud of.
Oh, I appreciate that. That's a good explanation of it. I just with the PRUD provision and allowing for the variation in the setbacks and the size of the lots and the streets and so on, and one of the provisions in there being the provision of open space. It's always a little bit of a concern to me when people developers will propose and saying, well, we have this open space, but we just intend on leaving it the way it is, natural. And that sometimes is appropriate or works, but sometimes I think really in a particular situation, a lot like what you've got here, it's better to do some amenities that will be of benefit to the residents of that development. And that sounds like what you're planning on doing. So I think that's great. I appreciate your explaining that and being willing to do that.
Absolutely. One other item, the open space to the west, that will be somewhat of an entry to the project. And so we will want to make certain that looks very nice as well. And so we'll utilize that to our advantage to kind of create a much more open, welcoming feeling to the community.
Great. That's good. Okay. Commissioners, any other commissioners' questions?
Just one other question. Hey, Dave, thanks for being here. Just a quick question. What do you anticipate the average price for these units?
So it'll vary. Again, the homes farthest to the east will probably be somewhere between 750 and some will be in excess of $1 million. The 10,000 square foot lots will be, probably somewhere in the 500 to 750, and then it will move downward. I think that the smallest lots, the 5s and 6,000s, will the starting price, a base price will be somewhere between $375 and $425. And I'm almost embarrassed to state those numbers. It's somewhat sad to think that our smallest lots, which are fairly small in comparison to the things that I was looking for when I was looking at a starter home, are that kind of a price. When I look at how are my children going to afford, a home on a 5,000 or 6,000 square foot lot that starts like that. But unfortunately, that's a little bit of the time that we're living in. And in addition, this area it's a very nice area, and I think that the single family lots complement this area, and it's good to have a little bit of a mix. It creates a very nice kind of a kind of a different mixed community, which is very nice to have. I hope I answered your question. Okay.
Yeah, you did. Thank you very much. Follow-up question. So if, what effects would happen if we didn't allow for this setback? I'm assuming you'd have to cut back on the number of units. Is that correct? Or?
Well, it just depends on the setback that we would be discussing. So side setbacks wouldn't, if we were to, I'm going to be very transparent because I don't have any other reason to be, but even the front setback, if it was a little larger, wouldn't really probably change the number of lots. It puts a little bit more of a constraint on the smaller lots. So most of the larger lots are all going to be at a minimum of 100 feet deep, which is
okay,
kind of a standard lot. So you're not going to really have any real small front setbacks or rear setbacks on a lot of that size. The only time it gets a little tight is on some of the smaller ones, but actually some of the smaller ones are actually fairly deep still. So to answer your question, the only thing that would honestly alter probably what I would be able to do is if I had to make the road substantially wider, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. If you had to make the roads wider, could you make that up by shrinking the open space areas?
Yeah, we might have a little bit of flexibility on that, but not too much. For example, the open space to the east is there because of two reasons. One, because of the aqueduct. Two, because we've got a fault line. And so we can't have the fault line is a minor fault line, and we just can't have any building structures on it. And so because it kind of goes right through that area, what we've decided to do again is take our weakness and make it a strength and just make it some beautiful open space. So I might be able to tuck that in a little bit, but that's where I would be a little bit constrained, is on the width of the roads.
Okay, thank you.
You bet, my pleasure.
Dave, this is Jared Doxey. I applaud what you've done on this layout. The market is what it is, but you've attempted to allow for different economic groups to be able to afford some of the smaller lots, and then go up from there as you get a little more elevation and the best views. But I love what you've done with the development, using the constraints of the site, and also having an opportunity for lower income families to enjoy a neighborhood like this. So I think you've done a great job.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Okay, seeing none. Thanks, Mr. Morton. We appreciate your explanations and your presentation. This is a public hearing to allow the PRUD overlay, which is very similar to a rezone or to applying a zone to a piece of property. So with that, we will open the public hearing now. And Lyle, if you can let us know if there's anyone attending the meeting or involved in the meeting who would like to make a comment as part of the public hearing.
Okay, so at this time, if anybody interested in speaking would raise their hand, we'll give you permission to speak. So far, I see no one. We'll give you a moment to do that if you're interested. Still no hands, Mr. Chair. Maybe another few seconds, just in case people are trying to look for it. Down on the bottom of your screen, there should be a raised hand option if you would like to say anything regarding this item to the commission. With that, Mr. Chair, I see no hands. If any pop up, I'll let you know. It looks like they may have tried to do so here in the short order, but otherwise, no hands have been raised.
All right. Well, we'll take that then as an indication that there's no one here to speak to this item. And with that, then we will close the public hearing. We'll return back to the Planning Commission and staff and the applicant for any further discussion on this. Just one comment that I've got, or question, Lyle, for you and staff. I think where you look at the development agreement, and this will have a development agreement as part of allowing the PRUD to go forward, and this will be a recommendation to the council. But I think it might be helpful to include in that development agreement some language that indicates that there will be what kinds of improvements may be made to the open space then as part of this overall development, so that that's clear in there, that it's in the development agreement and can be pointed to as saying this was part of what was agreed to in order to allow the flexibility on street widths and lot setbacks.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, that would be appropriate. The beauty of the development agreement is it can have very detailed and information regarding just about anything. And in this case, where the applicant has expressed that that is their intent, if you would like to ensure that that takes place, whether you want to see an agreement back before you that includes that language, or if you're simply comfortable passing it along with that, possibly other suggestions for the council, we can make sure it's in there before the council sees it.
I'm fine with that understanding, and if we reflect that in the motion, but I don't necessarily feel like we need to see it again, or that I need to see it again. I think we would rely on the staff to make sure that that language, something along that's appropriate, would be in there.
If you have specific items that were mentioned that are particular that you would like to make sure are in place, again, we can keep it open just to say include amenities as part of the agreement, or if you want 300 tot lots plated in gold, whatever detail you think is appropriate. If there is something specific, please let us know. Obviously, that was facetious, but just to make a point, we can be as open or specific as you'd like before sending that.
No, with the developer explaining that they were going to put in some tot lots and they were going to put in some grassed area that would allow for recreational use, picnicking, whatever. I think that would be appropriate. I think that would be adequate. That would probably address it, or at least as far as I'm concerned. Any others? I guess I have one more question on the easements as well. You were saying, Lyle, at this point that the proposed easements in the front are about 8 feet, where you're saying that the minimum setbacks will wind up being 15 feet to the garage, 12 feet to the porch. Could we expand those easements to 10 feet in the front, just to allow the public utilities folks to have a little bit more room to work with appropriately, that where they have the right to work within that?
I'll speak to that. I believe that would be very easy for a developer to accommodate, to allow additional easements over a yard where they can't place a building anyway, and just ensuring the right for utilities to work within that. So yeah, if you'd like to make that specific, the easements be increased. I don't know if you have any comments towards the setbacks as proposed, as we've discussed as part of that. Again, we can be as open or specific as you'd like in that recommendation to the council.
I personally don't have a problem with that setback. I think, again, those will be minimums, and then there'll be some variation in those. And I think having variation in setbacks is always a good thing as part of neighborhood design. So allowing them to go all the way to that minimum, I think is fine. I do agree that there may be a little bit of a tightness in the car parked on the driveway. With 15 feet, that's not a lot of room, but it is enough room, I guess, for a car. Probably not a really long car, but most cars could probably fit into that.
This is Quan.
Go ahead, Quan.
When I look at this, the spirit of it, I like it. Like the fact that the HOA is going to maintain the streets. So we're adding inventory to the city without adding any burden to any of the city services. I echo what Commissioner Doxey said about, praising the developer in getting this wide demographics. Obviously, we wish it was lower in price. Don't have any issues with that. As far as the setbacks, I don't have any issues with this. I think we all have heard that when you've got less width, it means slower speed. And I've seen that in Daybreak area where, yes, I've had a pullover. I've done that during the day and night, no issues there. And I think in West Kaysville, there's a development that looks similar to this. So yeah, I don't have any issues with this. Thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from commissioners?
I guess my one comment would be to echo what I think Steve said, which was the fire issue.
Oh yeah.
I certainly don't think our foothills are the foothills of California per se, but there is a fire risk the closer we get up the foothills, and this is about as close as it gets. And then in light of that, we are now narrowing, setbacks in arguably probably if there is a risky area for fire hazard, it's here in Kaysville. So I don't know quite what to do about that. Maybe certainly the furthest east lots, we have a bigger rear yard setback, but I think maybe at a minimum, we ask the council to possibly get creative on some solution to address that risk.
Yeah, there are some guidelines from the state, for example, about clear areas around buildings with the urban wildland interface. And maybe it would be well to recommend to the council that they consider including a requirement in there, or at least a specification, that for those lots that are adjacent to the wilderness area, the wilderness park area, that they, in those rear yards and those sides abutting that they apply those standards for keeping clear space for a wildfire.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, not to interrupt the discussion too much, but we did have a hand raised by one of the applicants, if you're interested in hearing from them.
Sure, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, Keaton Morton, I've got you. Once you're unmuted, you are live and free to
Okay. Lau, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you,
Yep,
Commissioner.
we can
So I think that I think this is something we kind of, I've actually thought about as well. The nice thing is that those homes, the estate lots towards the east, they're about 165 feet deep. And that is mainly because of the aqueduct line that we have that will run along that. So that I think will help with this issue. Most homes now are about 100 feet deep, but I think that with those homes being 165 feet deep, 65 feet deeper than a normal home, I think that will help with this issue. But yeah, we're open to hearing and kind of being reasonable, but that is an issue that I have kind of thought about. But I think that with these homes being super deep, and mainly because of the aqueduct line that runs along the front yards of that, it's kind of forcing us to do that. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out so that you guys do know that will help with this, is that how deep that those lots are on the eastern side of the property. So.
Okay, great, thank you. Commissioners, any other comments or discussion? All right. If there's no other discussion on this, then I think we're ready to consider a motion. If there's anyone willing to make a motion, and when we get that, I have a couple of points. I've kind of written down some of the points here that we've made during the discussion that I would maybe encourage the maker of the motion to include.
This is Quan. I'll make the motion to approve, to consider the PRUD overlay zone and development agreement for common open space subdivision consisting of approximately 23 acres at 1300 East, 1084 North, along with the staff recommendations and along with the points that the commissioner has to make.
Yeah, the points that I think that would be perhaps good to consider in this would be one on the open space amenities, that there be specifics included in the development agreement about the inclusion of tot lots, open space, grassed areas, recreation areas on those open spaces. We don't need to be more specific than that, I think, but just that there's an acknowledgement that those kinds of things would be included in the open space area that's shown in the plan. The second would be the easement width on the front of those lots, to expand those to at least 10 feet, or as the public utility staff may recommend on that. And the third item would be that for those lots that are adjacent to the Kaysville Mountain Wilderness area, that in those rear yards, that the council consider imposing or at least recommending that the requirements that be followed for the urban wildfire interface standards that have been established by the state for the clear areas adjacent to those wildlands. And I guess, Quan, would you be willing to include those things in your motion?
Yes.
Okay. Any others from any other commissioners? Let's see if there's a second to that motion.
I'll make the second.
Steve has seconded that motion. Any other discussion? All right. Well, then let's go ahead and vote on this motion to approve or recommend approval to the city council of applying the PRUD overlay zone to this property with those recommendations that we've included. Let's start the voting with Quan. Quan?
Aye.
Jared?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Abby?
Aye.
Josh?
Aye.
Toby?
Aye.
And I vote aye. I think we got everyone, right? Okay, looks like that motion passes unanimously. So thanks very much. Lyle, any questions that you have with regard to that approval, or are we pretty good?
I think that's well. So we'll work with the applicant on making those modifications and improvements to the agreement before bringing it to the council. For anybody listening, it's likely that that will be ready for city council at May the 7th, I believe is the next time that they meet. And it will be in a very similar format to this one this evening. I suspect via Zoom and YouTube Live.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Mortons. We appreciate your coming and for your explanation and for the project that you're proposing. All right. All right, our next agenda item is a public hearing to consider an ordinance amending chapter 17-33 sign regulations of the city's planning and zoning regulations, revised ordinances of Kaysville City. Lyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this came about from a recent planning commission meeting where the commission saw multiple development signs. And we saw one here this evening, and Mr. Jessup that presented that joked that this may be the last one you ever have to see. And so I guess I don't have any exhibits for you, but essentially what we proposed in that originally any new development, they like to put up the sign with lots for sale, prices starting at the whatever number, right? And so we'll commonly see those with subdivisions. Currently, they're required to come before the planning commission for approval. And we saw that evening, and we've seen over the years that as long as it's meeting the basic size requirements, which are outlined within the ordinance, and they're staying outside of the Clearview section of the ordinance, or excuse me, not blocking traffic, staying out of the Clearview triangle near property corners and intersections, they're being approved. So they're not things that we were seeing conditions applied to. It becomes basically an effort to just monitor them to make sure that they're not up when the subdivision is no longer selling items. So the proposal and the ordinance before you simply takes that from a conditional use aspect under the purview of the Planning Commission and puts it into a permitted use process. We'll just read the language that's on there. It maintained the height and size requirements as were previously enacted, up to 12 feet in height, 32 square feet standard, up to 96 feet, depending on the lot frontage. It's on the private property. And the important part is that it would be a permitted use in all zones, allowed on property that is under development for a new subdivision or has an active building permit. So that kind of helps bridge both a commercial development and residential larger developments. Only allowed on a residential development where there are at least 3 or more lots per cell. Otherwise, they just would use a standard for sale sign in the yard rather than these larger ones. And must be removed within 30 days from when 100% of the units or suites are occupied. So we believe instead of every 6 months bringing those back towards the Planning Commission to renew or extend the permit, we can just check our permit occupancy as we go through the building permit process. And if we give occupancy and everything, we tell the developer, whoever's got the sign up, that it's time to take that down. So with that, one other minor change of note on a different signs, as we were looking at the ordinance, we recommended just a minor tweak to another sign type, which we consider a construction sign. They're kind of similar. They generally advertise architect or the team that's doing something. Previously allowed for those to be 20 feet in height. We just recommended dropping that height down to 12 feet, felt that was sufficient and hopefully less obtrusive. And that is the entirety of what was recommended. We're looking for a recommendation from the Planning Commission on this to forward to the City Council. And remind you, it is a public hearing. This has been advertised as such. Give the opportunity for any public who'd like to speak to it as well.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Appreciate that, Lyle. I'm very much in favor of this because we basically just wind up pretty much just cookie cutter blanket approving most of these because they meet the requirements of the ordinance. And if they meet the requirements of the ordinance, just, let them go ahead. We've had this discussion before. So with that, any other comments from any of the commissioners about this before we go to the public hearing?
I'd just like to thank staff for moving on this as quickly as they have. I think this will expedite things for us and actually help citizens get stuff done faster.
Agreed. I think that's right. Anyone else? All right, this is a public hearing to get comment with this being an amendment or a proposed amendment to the city's zoning ordinance and development code. And so with that, we'd like to open the public hearing. And if there is anyone attending or participating in this meeting that would like to comment on this, we'd invite you to do so now. Lyle, we'll have you check and see if there's anyone there that is looking to comment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm still showing we have 4 people attending and participating with us. So we're dwindling in numbers a little bit as the meeting's gone on, but if any of you are interested in commenting on this, please raise your hand now and we'll give you a chance to speak. I see no hands being raised, Mr. Chair.
Okay, then we will go ahead and close the public hearing and turn back to the commission. Commissioners, any further discussion with regard to this proposed change? And if not, then we will entertain a motion. Steve,
Actually,
I don't know if you're trying to make a comment. There's a lot of static coming across and we're not hearing you. If that's,
no, you're fine. I had to get,
go.
there we are. No, I'll make a motion to recommend that we pass the ordinance, or for the recommendation of the ordinance, amending chapter 17-33 sign regulations of title 17, planning and zoning of the revised ordinance of Kaysville City to the city council.
Steve Lyon has made a motion to recommend approval of the ordinance as proposed. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Toby Barris has seconded that motion. Any other discussion by the commission? Seeing none, let's go ahead and proceed to the vote. I will vote first. I vote aye. Josh?
Aye.
Jared?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
Let's see, Abby
Aye.
and Quan.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. And we make that recommendation on to the city council. Thanks, commissioners. I think that's a positive step. Next item on the agenda is another public hearing to consider another ordinance amendment. This one is to amend section 17-34-7, the common open space subdivision provisions in the PRUD, planned residential unit development chapter of the city's planning and zoning ordinance. We'll turn to Lyle.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this one is even more, as far as the ordinance, has very little text change in it. It's a simple matter of a zone that we created recently, the R16. It's a single family residential zoning district, allowing 6,000 square foot lot sizes is generally the way that it's written. That's about 7 units an acre as far as density. When we created the zone, we simply didn't add it to the R1, or excuse me, the PRUD overlay zone as an option for consideration. So as we were looking at the PRUD chapter for other developments, and recently we noticed that that was out of there and felt it was appropriate to add that tool to the toolbox. It does not mean that anyone who gets an R16 automatically gets the PRUD, but without it, you don't have the option to consider doing some of the things we were looking at tonight to look for some flexibility or variation on a development should anybody desire to do that in the future. And so we're simply adding the R16 text to a table of different zoning districts that adds the zone in there and simply states that the density would, like the other zones, be based upon that 6,000 square foot lot size, 1 unit for every 6,000 square feet that they have within the development. So with that, again, as mentioned with the introduction, it is a public hearing, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, so Lyle, this is essentially, I guess, basically an oversight from when it was done originally. Is that accurate to say?
I think that's fair. It's in a different section of the ordinance. So when we created the R16, it's under a different chapter. And so we aren't always keen enough to catch every other section that might be influenced by it. So yeah, this cleans that up and allows that option.
Yeah, okay. Any comments or questions by the commission of staff? Okay, seeing none, once again, this is a public hearing as an amendment to the city's planning and zoning ordinance. So let's go again to the participants, the public that may be participating in the meeting, and see if there is anyone who would like to comment with regard to that. Lyle?
Okay, the last reminder on this, we still have a few bodies left. Again, if you are interested in sharing a comment, please raise your hand at this time and we'll give you permission to speak. Yeah, so far, Mr. Chair, I have no raised hands or interest in speaking to this item.
Okay, I think with that, given that, we will then go ahead and close the public hearing and turn back to the commission, see if there are any other questions or comments with regard to it. If not, we'll entertain a motion.
This is Toby. I'll make a motion to recommend amending to the city council to amend the section 17-34-7 as proposed by the staff.
So a motion by Toby Barris to recommend approval of the proposed amendment to this chapter of the zoning ordinance. Is there a second to that motion?
This is Quan. I'll
I'll
second
second
that.
it.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, Quan.
Go for it, Quan.
Yeah, this is Quan. I'll second the motion.
Okay, second by Quan. Any other discussion with regard to the motion? All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and proceed to a vote. Start with Quan. Quan, go ahead.
Aye.
Jared,
Aye.
Steve,
Aye.
Abby,
Aye.
Josh? Josh, I saw his mouth go aye. I didn't hear him, but I saw it. There we go. Thank you. Toby?
Aye.
And the chair, Will Summercorn, votes aye. All right. Unanimous vote once again to recommend to the council the amendment to the ordinance as proposed. Ladies and gentlemen, that takes care of our formal agenda. We now have our regular standing call to the public. If there's anyone attending or participating in this meeting that would like to make any comments to the commission, now is the time.
Let's see, Mr. Chair, I see 2 attendees still, so we've lost a couple more. I'll give them just a moment. If they're interested, they can select to raise their hand and are welcome to make a comment to the commission. Yeah, I'm not seeing any interest in making a comment at this time, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no, we will take that as there being no one here to make any comments to the commission under the call of the public. Let's move on then to other matters, the reports, correspondence, and calendar by the staff.
Just briefly, so at the very beginning of this meeting, for anyone who might be watching by YouTube, so we missed a couple minutes. I think we got it fairly quick. Thanks. Someone let us know it wasn't on. When we repost this, both the audio and the video from the recording of the Zoom meeting, which is all recorded, will be available on that. So if anyone wants to watch the whole thing, we'll make sure that's shared. Other reports, I suspect we're still going to be doing this for a little while, even with some of the hopeful, anticipated relaxing of our safety and health requirements through the COVID that I suspect for likely the next month, and we'll kind of continue to play it by ear. We'll be meeting in this format, and May the 14th is our next anticipated and scheduled meeting as a planning commission.
So while you're on that, Lyle, I do have a question. With that being our next meeting being May 14th, and Steve, maybe you can help answer this question. When I saw that the commission have announced that as of May 1st, they're going to be relaxing a lot of the I don't know what you would call it, just the requirements for separation and going out. Would that mean that it would allow public meetings to convene again, or do you know how this is all going to?
So we had a meeting with Brian Hatch, and I attended that yesterday. I was in the back outside all the cameras. And so from what I'm understanding is it's going to be phased in. So there's going to be several phases to this. They're going to see how it goes until the 15th of May. And then they'll probably open it up to meetings over 10 people.
Okay.
And then, I mean, this is a phased approach. So, I mean, I think we're wise to probably follow that guidance. But I think, you know, moving forward, the health department director and the health department are taking a cautious approach. As I think their public opinion and other things are guiding them that way, as well as the data. I mean, we're still in that phase where we plateau. They think we plateaued about a week ago based on the data, and so they don't want to reinfect people. So I mean, this is just a move to start getting businesses open, getting people ready for that May 1st date, and then reassess on the 15th, and then reassess again around June 1st, and then see where it goes. So I think my gut feeling is we probably will not have an open meeting with live bodies together, and if we do, it may be just us still broadcasting from being able to do it, but still have the public coming in on broadcasting on YouTube like the commission has. So that's my guess, is that it'll be a more phased approach.
Okay, so very likely our next meeting, May 14th, will probably do very similar to this still use the Zoom format.
Correct.
Okay, all right, Lyle.
Yeah, unless there's other correspondence or reports from the commission, just a brief update on our general plan process. I spoke with our consultants today. They were hoping to be here actually today doing some site work, but they'll be out early next week. And we suspect that I think the first week of May, they're hoping to reach out to the steering committee, whatever we decided to call that group, to begin kind of a kickoff with them. And probably a week or so after, so early mid-May, get the public involved. I think, it'll be a little unique. We'll probably be meeting in a similar format with them. We'll try to do a lot of remote type engagement and involvement and surveys and information through the web and so forth. But that is something that they're getting close to being ready to get that involvement on, as they've more or less they're wrapping up the data collection that they've had and creating some of the groundwork to then build everything on, get comments on. So something to look forward to. So yeah, with that, unless there's other direction from the commission that you'd like to give us at this time, I think that's our quick report.
Well, that sounds great. As far as any other trainings or things that we usually talk about, given our current environment, there just ain't that much going on. So I guess we continue to view this as kind of a vacation in some ways. Any comments from any of the commissioners? Anything that any of you would like to bring up? Okay, well, with that, Lyle, anything else? It's kind of the parting words here.
I think that's enough said for me tonight.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then we will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved by Steve. Is there a second?
Second.
Juan and Jared are always, they got a competition going tonight. We'll take Jared's second for that one. And with that, then we will stand adjourned. Thanks very much, everybody. And looks like we'll see you on the 14th of May again if we don't see you at something else before then.
Thanks, Dad.
Thank you.
You.
See you soon.
Great job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Good job, Kyle.